Officially start this webinar. Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on foxes as a pest in Victoria. Thank you for joining us, and we are thrilled to have people from all over Victoria and beyond to talk about such important topic to all of us. My name is Ana Pimenta, and I am the Landcare Development Coordinator for Landcare Victoria. And joining me today is also Sarah Vella. She's our Communications Officer. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are all meeting today. For me, that is the Gunakuna country. I pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge the deep connections that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have to the country. I also recognize the role traditional owners continue to play in caring for land, water and wildlife, and I am thankful for their openness to share culture with the Landcare community. A quick note before we dive in. So today's topic touches on complex and sometimes sensitive issues. The management of invasive species like foxes can raise a range of perspectives, especially when it impacts on biodiversity, animal welfare, and cultural values. We appreciate and respect the diversity of opinions in the room and ask that we all engage with respect and openness. And just a little bit of housekeeping. We've got a lot to cover in a short amount of time. There will be opportunities throughout the evening for some Q&As, but feel free to add any questions or comments in our Q&A box. You can find it at the bottom of your screen if you're using a laptop. I think if you're using a phone at the top. And while we'll do our best to answer your questions during this session, we might not get to everything. So if you do have a question that goes unanswered or something you'd like to follow up, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us after the webinar. We'd love to continue the conversation. This webinar is recorded, so anyone that has registered will receive a link via email, but it will also be available in our website. This event today is supported by the Victorian Government through the Partnerships Against Pest Round 3 Stream 2 program. And it is the first webinar out of a series of 5 webinars on pests and weeds. And we'll do one on risk management and engagement. And we are very lucky today to be joined by Gillian Busnett and the Cat and Foxes Coordinator at Invasive Species Australia, Thomas Nelson, also from Invasive Species Australia, and Richard McTernan is the Program Manager at the Dudrowa-Dargal Aboriginal Corporation to talk about the impacts of foxes on Indigenous totems and how are they managed. Gillian is our key speaker, and Thomas will also be here in the background answering some of your questions. Gillian Busnett is the National Feral and Cat Fox Management Coordinator at the Centre for Invasive Species Solutions. She raises awareness about the impacts of feral cats and foxes, promoting best practices in managing these invasive species and coordinating management efforts. Jill is an ecologist with experience in wildlife conservation, fire ecology, community engagement, and natural resource management. Jill's work spans in Australian states, addressing issues related to both cats and foxes, amongst other conservation programs. Dr. Thomas Nelson is the support officer for the National Feral, Cat and Fox Management Coordination Program at the Centre of Invasive Species Solutions. Tom works on project communications and develops extension materials for land managers, community groups, pest control professionals, and biosecurity organisations. He has also a bachelor's degree in environmental biology and a doctorate in animal physiology, not psychology, physiology from the University of Adelaide. Also, we have with us tonight Richard McTernan, is currently an Indigenous Landcare facilitator who works with the Dudrowa-Dargal Aboriginal Corporation, more known as DDAC, in the northeast of Victoria. His work involves working with 5 Landcare networks in the northeast of Victoria with a focus on traditional burning. As part of his work, he's also assisting in wetland management and restoration, and in particular working on the protection of turtles at the Ryan's Lagoon. Richard's been working with Landcare in the northeast for the past 20 years. And so that's it from me. So I'll hand over to Jill to continue with her presentation.
Thank you very much, Anna, and welcome everyone. It's great to have so many people signing in today and interested in fox management, and thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. We're going to be probably whipping through this topic pretty quickly tonight. It might feel like it's a long time, but when I started putting slides together, it's really not very long to sort of cover a whole range of things around fox impacts and management. And so, as Anna said, if you want more information or you've got some questions that we haven't answered, please reach out to us as well. We'd love to hear from you. So first up, I too would like to recognise the first custodians of this country and acknowledge their care for country that they have undertaken for over 60,000 years or more, and that the land has never been ceded. I would like to welcome any Aboriginal people who are joining us tonight and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'm coming to you from Lutruwita, Tasmania. So as Anna said, we work for the Centre for Invasive Species Solutions, and the funding for this program comes from the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry. And so that's been excellent to have that support over the last almost 4 years, as well as all the in-kind and information support we get from a whole suite of stakeholders. There's 2 of us on the team, so myself and Tom, and so we do as much as we can for a 2-person team. In terms of national coordination, our program really is around raising the awareness of why we need to manage cats and foxes. We look after both species, but we're just talking about foxes tonight. So impacts to biodiversity, agriculture, human health, the whole suite of different things. Why do we do it? That's really important. We also want to talk about the how. So coordinated best practice management. How do we do it? That can be around going out and undertaking training, talking to a range of different stakeholders, getting a whole suite of on-ground management happening. We also really do a lot of partnerships, networks and linkages. And so this is really key actually for the program, because we talk to a whole suite of different people, and often when you're doing your research or management, you can be quite focused on what you're doing and not necessarily aware of what else is happening around the country, and even broader than that. And so we can really start to link people up with each other and programs up with each other. Essentially, this is kind of a bit of a diagram of national coordination. And so it's around sharing the national plans, so the threatened species action plans and the threat abatement plans, down through state and territory plans, regional plans, local plans, and getting that information back up through those avenues as well. So, you know, what are the barriers to cat and fox management? How can we help with that? What are current projects around the place? What policy and procedure reviews are going on? What funding opportunities are there? And that's really kind of a big part of what we do. There's actually 5 national coordinators, if you didn't know. So there's a rabbit coordinator, Heidi, she's just started, and I think she might be talking at another point, I'm not sure, but also Heather does deer, me in the middle. Sorry, Heather does pigs. I do cats and foxes, Annalise does deer, and Greg does wild dog management. So they're the national coordination team. So in terms of foxes in Australia, you might know some of this, but we'll go through it anyway. They are a declared established pest in Victoria, and in fact they're a declared pest right across Australia. And this means that it's up to land managers to undertake control and be responsible for the control of foxes on their own property. So it is actually under the legislation that we undertake fox control. They occupy most habitats in Australia except for the far north, but they are actually starting to creep up there. So this map, we have heard that there's definitely foxes starting to come into the Kimberley and into the certainly further up in Northern Territory and Queensland. So they are starting to shift further north. Victorian habitats are highly favourable to foxes. As you can see, that darker colour down right through that Victoria area is where there's quite high populations of foxes. So all of that agricultural country, all of the bushland is really favourable to foxes. They have rapidly spread. Really, that was linked with rabbits, so they do really like rabbits. They're generally nocturnal, so even if you don't see them, doesn't mean they're not there. They're really opportunistic with their food, and that makes them, really successful pest species. They're carnivorous. They will hunt, they'll scavenge, they'll eat fruit, they'll eat insects, and so they'll eat rubbish. They're really opportunistic, and that makes populations quite high in areas. They're highly adaptive. They have pretty large home ranges. They can travel 11 to 15 kilometres in a night hunting, so they move about the landscape quite a bit. They don't always return to the same den. They breed once a year, which we can use in terms of management. The males mature at about 10 months. 85% of females breed in the first year. So they're pretty quick breeders, 3 to 5 cubs a litter. So they do have quite a high mortality rate for juveniles, but they do breed quickly. Juveniles disperse in spring, and they can go quite long distances. So 14 kilometres for females, 68 kilometres for males is an average, but they have been recorded to travel up to 300 kilometres. Impacts on wildlife. So they do have significant impact on a whole suite of our native wildlife. They'll pretty much hunt any animals up to 5.5 kilos in weight, so anything up to our wallabies, certainly. They have been a key reason for the extinction of 14 of our 33 mammals and one of our bird species since they were introduced in 1850. So they have already had impacts. They're a key threat to at least 95 nationally listed threatened species. With the new fox tap coming out shortly, I suspect we'll find out that that's more. So 14 birds, 48 mammals, and 12 reptiles. We don't really know about frogs because it's hard to tell whether they're in the diet because you can't really find their bones and things like that. They definitely spread weeds, so they do change habitat in that aspect as well, not just predating on species. When we look at fox diets, they eat a lot of plant material and a lot of invertebrates. And then they tend to eat lots of rabbits when they're around. They do love a rabbit. And then those sort of medium to larger mammal sizes. So, and they do get into livestock as well, particularly lambs and kid goats and poultry. So they do tend to feed on slightly larger animals than feral cats. Where there's plenty of rabbits, they tend to eat less of our native mammals, but where there's less rabbits, they'll eat more macropods and native rodents. So they can have quite a big impact. And the two together, cats and foxes together, are really, they're just greater than the sum of their parts. So when we've got cats and foxes both predating in the landscape, their impacts are even greater. So areas like Tasmania, Kangaroo Island, where there isn't foxes, we still have quite a lot of our ground-dwelling mammal species, whereas we've lost them quite extensively through mainland Australia, and a big part of that is predation by the two predators. They also impact our native wildlife through competition. So our native carnivores, they compete with them. And so we know things like spotted-tailed quolls, where there's good fox and in fact wild dog management is where we get good quoll populations. And so we know that cats and foxes will certainly compete with our native predators as well. Just as a very small snapshot, there's definitely more threatened species in Victoria that are impacted, but here are some of the species, definitely those small to medium-sized ground-dwelling mammals, all of the ground nesting birds, shore nesting birds, turtles, and we'll hear a bit about that from Richard. And so they both feed on turtles, but they definitely dig up nests and things like that. In terms of agriculture, their main impact is on lambs in particular, but also kid goats and poultry. They might go for a larger ewe, but on the whole, they predate newborn lambs, and that's where their biggest impacts are. And particularly if we're looking at that warm temperate, cool temperate type of environment of Victoria. Rabbits, as you can see, is quite a big part of their diet, livestock as well, and then native mammals. So they are predating on a significant number of lambs. A few different studies have shown that they can have quite a bit of impact. On average, it's about 7% of lamb loss has been a result of predation by foxes. But we also think the impact is higher because they're also causing impacts for mismothering of ewes, we think. So, but newborn lambs are definitely the highest thing predated by foxes. And so the predation impacts is higher in those lambing paddocks. Than foxes that are near lambing paddocks are certainly found to have a lot more lamb in their diets. And so that's where the largest impacts are where foxes are really common, where you might be lambing early in the season or out of step with other neighbouring farmers, or you might be the only one with lambs. And so your impacts are likely to be greater because you'll be drawing foxes in. Saunders also found that impacts were between 1% and 30%. So they can be quite high, and certainly talking to a number of farmers around the region, they are finding in that higher percentage where fox management isn't being undertaken. Depends on flock size, health and management. Again, those differences in timing, duration of lambing, density of foxes. So that's 7% of loss, but also we think part of that 25% of mismothering is potentially through predator abundance and activity as well. And if we get to it, I'll talk a little bit about a case study in Mansfield in Victoria. And when they first started looking at managing foxes, they found that 18% of the lambs that they autopsied were killed by predators. So it can be quite high. Then there's a whole suite of different diseases that they also transmit. So that's a different form of impact as well. ABARES did a study of landholders, and the estimated costs was a total of 198 million. So that was both expenditure on management, but then also residual losses after management had occurred. And in Victoria, what we found is those residual losses, so what was still there in the landscape after management, was 13 million. So if we hadn't been undertaking fox control, that impact would have been even greater. Then there's also impacts on people. So particularly urban and peri-urban areas, they love to go for chickens and guinea pigs and poultry and all sorts of things. They can get into your irrigation and be a nuisance with your rubbish bins and digging up a whole lot of stuff. And also they do carry diseases that can be transmitted to pets and also potentially people. So the impact on us as well is quite high. But then also, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let Richard talk. So Richard's also going to talk a little bit about the cultural loss and the fact that foxes are impacting our wildlife, and what does that mean from a cultural perspective. Richard. So you just need to unmute yourself, Richard.
There you go.
There we go.
Okay. Good evening. My name's Richard and I work for the Dargo Aboriginal Corporation. I'm a Landcare facilitator in the Northeast catchment. I help facilitate projects between Landcare networks and the traditional owners, and to assist people with land management with government agencies and private landholders. But first, I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional custodians of this land, not only in my country, but wherever you work and live. To start, pest animal for local traditional owners, pest animal and weed affect the cultural landscape, both above the ground and below the ground. And two examples is that burrowing animals disturb cultural material, and above the ground, as mentioned, like goats, they occupy rocky areas and affect artwork through their rubbing. Known impacts are foxes in the northeast. They predate on reptiles, frogs, native animals such as pygmy possum in the Alps, and the bandicoot locally. There's also been studies on brolgas in the northeast, which foxes are a major factor. Today I'd like to talk about the effect of foxes on our totem species, the turtles. So the local people I work with, the turtle is one of their most important totems. Bit of background, I work with the TOs at a place called Ryan's Lagoon, which is about 165 hectare of wetland near Wodonga. It has about 57 bird species, 4 of them rare, water rat, platypus, 3 species of turtle, which are all endangered, 4 species of frog recorded so far, and 5 species of reptile that we know of so far. According to the national stats, I think that's about 4 to 8 foxes per square kilometre, meaning that we've got roughly 9 resident foxes in our reserve. We see them regularly. Every few days, we'll see 3 or 4 running around the place, but we'll also see them at night. I've got a little short film which will most probably explain a little bit more. What they're doing at the wetland is that they're predating on the native birds and sadly the turtle eggs. So when it rains, the turtle come out and lay their eggs, dig a little hole in it, and within 24 hours the foxes have come in and dug up the nest and destroyed the eggs. So the problem here is that the studies done by La Trobe University is showing that there's minimal recruitment of young turtle between 1 and 7 years, which means the populations are getting older and therefore going into decline. So currently we're working with La Trobe Uni and they're about to instigate a study on manipulating the fox behaviour via taste aversion to condition them to cease exploiting turtle nest as a food source. In the future, we'd like to do some more work around the eDNA, get some scats and see what they're also predating on within our wetlands, and do a little bit more work with the landholders in controlling foxes because we see them quite frequently. Now, I might just hand it over to Anna or someone and just play a short film.
Long ago, before the world was filled with cities and roads, the rivers and lands of the Wodonga and Alpine regions were alive with the songs of the earth. The Dudura people, traditional custodians of this land, had walked these lands for thousands of years, listening to the whisper of the wind, the ripple of the water, the call of the animals. They knew that all living things were connected through the spirit of country, land, water, sky. In this very place lived a wise and strong turtle named Tani, an eastern long-neck turtle. She knew that the land, the water, and the sky were one, and that they needed to be cared for. The Dudura people had always known this. Their teachings, passed down through generations, reminded everyone, if you look after country, country will look after you.
This would have been a very significant place for the old people. We're just trying to connect all that stuff back together. Turtles are very special to us, one of our totems, and it's all about looking after your totem.
Foxes are eating 93% of our turtle eggs. Future-wise is looking very grim.
Some of the feral predators, like foxes and cats, are responsible for the extinction of, I think, well over 20 Australian mammals, and then there's a whole heap of birds, small reptiles as well, that are extinct or going extinct, that are on the endangered list purely because of those 2 species alone. Foxes will eat everything from 5 grams up to 5 kilos, I think that's their normal prey size. Everything from a little dung beetle up to a small wallaby. So there's a lot of rushes through here, just really thick patches that have popped up since the billabong dried out. Lots of frogs, lizards, small birds. They love living in these rushes. And so that's where you find the foxes as well. A lot of people think foxes live in dens. Like 9 times out of 10, they're up above ground, living in thick cover like that, can hold a dozen foxes. This lagoon here, it was only a couple years ago we started doing pest control in here. The first time we came through was a dozen or 14 foxes.
Got Latrobe doing some scientific stuff on them.
Through the years that we developed this partnership with the Jujaroo, I think it's been really great experience. The Jujaroo are very welcoming people, and they really try to make the difference and improve this habitat. And I think the partnership with researchers from the university bring a really good outcome for both parties, because we can get involved and see that our research is really making difference.
At the moment, we've got some eggs that were being taken out of a port turtle that died, but we're going to put them in a nest. They're long necks, common long necks.
And then you're going to put all this in.
And then I'm going to put the mesh over it so the foxes can't dig it up. But the turtles can still get out. Oh.
All right, that's it. Thanks for that, Richard. It's great to have the, a good case study that's happening in Victoria, and that's a great little film. Really shows just some of the impacts that foxes have on our wildlife, and then also some of the things that people are doing about it. And certainly, as said there, that turtles are really impacted, and just one fox can definitely go through and predate over the course of a turtle nesting season on a whole suite of turtle nests and eggs, and can really disrupt their recruitment. So that's excellent, some of the stuff going on there.
All right. Yeah. So thanks so much, Richard, for that. And I think there's a few, we've got a little bit of time for a Q&A, isn't it, Jill? So yep. We don't have a lot of questions, but please feel free to add them on, but we will continue to deliver some more information. So those questions might be answered later. But we have a comment here, well, a question here from Virginia, Richard, about and I think was answered in the video, that if you try to cage the turtle nests, that is being successful there in Mornington Peninsula. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, only thing we can really do at the moment is to net the turtle nest. So the volunteers, we've got a turtle group up here, plus the scientists, and they look at the weather and they know that when it's going to rain, they go out and they're netting the nest as soon as the turtles are laid, and that's working at the moment. That's stopping the predation.
Thanks, Richard. Jill, this one might be for you. It's a hard one to answer. Would you anticipate an increase in fox populations on Parks Victoria and Deaker on property, so public land, due to state funding constraints? With limited resources, parks are currently working on implementing their own baiting programs and are in the process of training staff to manage this. So.
Oh, yeah, that's a big question. And I guess it depends on the landscape. There's certainly some really good, there's some good fox management programs that are happening on national parks, and also some excellent programs that are happening on private property. And I think it's really important to remember that foxes are right across the landscape. So they're not only found in national parks, which is quite a common thing of, parks being the reservoir for all of our pests and weeds, but that's not actually the case. They're quite happily through agricultural and other landscapes as well. So yes, look, I mean, more funding is always good. And being able to manage these species with all of the tools that are available, and we'll talk about that next, is really important. And it's really important as a community that we support the management of foxes across the landscape, because, we're really wanting to reduce their impacts, both on our beautiful wildlife, but also for farmers as well, to give them good sustainable farming opportunities to be able to have a diversity in terms of the stock and crops that they can manage on their land. So we probably haven't completely answered that, but yeah, we need coordinated management and effective management across private and public estate.
Thanks, Jill. So I can see that Tom has answered some of the questions in the chat. We do have some here that I guess it's out of curiosity by someone. So Richard, how can you tell where the turtles nest? Philippa found that seeing one laying, going back to put a cover was really difficult to find, and she had covered it so well.
Yeah, because we've only been doing this for about 8 months at the moment, and working with the scientists, we've learned a lot about where they nest. And in our area, it's mostly a north or west facing bank above a billabong or waterway, and we kind of just walk around and we can see the slight indentations where previous nests have been. So we're concentrating on those areas to see if there's any signs of turtles. But we've also found that inundation of water, so with the levels rising in that, we're also finding that turtles will take opportunity to nest in other areas too, but primarily north-facing areas. And the 3 turtles, one is maybe 1 metre from the bank, another one will go up to 50 metres away, and another one will go, the broad shell will go up to over 100 metres away from water.
Thanks, Richard. Got time for one more question, and it might be answered later, Jill, but you tell us, is there any work being done on biological control?
Oh, that's a very good question, and I actually haven't covered that. So good question. I talk about other things. So yes, there is some work looking at different control options, less around biological control and more around contraceptive and gene drive type control. So gene drive being that, as foxes breed, they breed males instead of both males and females, and over time that will get bred out. The difficulty with that's really important for us to keep looking at, and alternative management options are really important for us to keep researching for sure. In terms of gene drive, we've only just sort of got it to work in mice in a lab condition, and so we're looking at about 20 years before that's going to be something that's probably viable for cats and foxes, because these things just take a long time, and we want to make sure that all the checks and balances are in place before, those kind of animals get released into the environment. And then also it's how many do we need for it to be effective, and how long is that going to take for, fox decline and potentially eradication. And some of the modelling for cats, we're looking at 100 years. So yes, there's definitely work being done on alternative control methods, but we need to use what we've got now effectively across the country in order to just keep the species that we've got.
Thanks, Jill. I think we can go to the second part of our webinar, where we will talk, I believe, about best management practices.
Let me share the screen. You think I'd be used to that by now? Yes, so again, we'll continue to whiz through this. So there's a whole suite of resources out there, both on our website, PestSmart. Agriculture Victoria's got some excellent fox management videos and information on their website. And so as we go through this, Tom will probably just put some of those links into the chat just to make it easy for people, but we'll whiz through some of that as we go. So I just wanted to quickly talk about fox density, and it does vary across the landscape. And really it's a lot about food. Where there's lots of food, there's lots of foxes. And so in our arid areas, we're looking at a sort of average density of about 0.9 fox per square kilometre. In the temperate agricultural systems of Victoria, we're looking at 4 to 8 foxes per square kilometre, and we'd probably be looking at sort of similar numbers in some of those environments where we've got lots of prey available to foxes. Our highest densities are in the cities. It's really interesting seeing people going, oh my goodness, I saw a fox in the city, and being surprised by it. But actually Melbourne, Perth, Sydney, that's our highest density of foxes, again, because there's plenty of food. And so when we think about, so say we look at our temperate agricultural systems, and also probably areas like, you know, Gippsland and down in the Otways and things like that, where we've got, say, 4 to 8 foxes per square kilometre. But what does that actually mean? And if you think about it, so from your, say, your lambing paddock or your hay shed or your house or your, you know, your rock wallaby area, if you're looking at that, a 10 kilometre square radius at 4 foxes per square kilometre, that's 1,256 foxes. And so when you sort of think about it, it's like, oh, 4 foxes, that's not many. But when you actually calculate that out into the landscape, then we're looking at 1,200 to 2,500 foxes in a 10 kilometre square radius from a certain point. So that's a huge number of foxes. And that's important to remember when we're looking at effective management. So there's been some studies looking at breeding rates of foxes. And so how many foxes do we, how much of a percentage of the population do we need to get rid of in order to just counter breeding rates? And the average to that is 65% of the population per year. That varies. So if you're in areas where there's not a lot of food resources, and so it's likely that juvenile numbers are not going to recruit very quickly, and you're going to have a lot of death, that can be lower. But again, in those really good agricultural systems and a lot of our nice areas of bush in Victoria, you probably want to be looking at that at least 65% of a population to reduce those numbers. So again, if you're looking at, you know, 1,200 foxes in a 10 kilometre radius, that's quite a lot of foxes that we need to knock down. In terms of management, there's been some research looking at relative humaneness of the tools that we've got available to us, to really look at, okay, you know, to make sure that the suite of tools that we use are the most humane that we can use, because it's not the fox's fault. We should be undertaking management in the most effective way that we can, but also in the most humane way. And so there's been a whole suite of studies looking at that. And if you want to know a bit more, and you can jump onto PestSmart, and there's a humaneness matrix there that gives you a bit of an idea of how some of these figures sort of came up. Obviously, the most humane is going to be a quick death with a firearm, because it's quick. The fox isn't having any suffering before the mode of death, and it's quick to do, but it's not as effective, and we'll talk about that. So it's, when we're looking at management, we want to use the most humane tools we can, but we also want them to be effective in terms of reducing the impact. Otherwise, all we're doing is killing a couple of foxes. So we really need to weigh all of those things up when we're looking at a management program. In terms of management tools that we have, the use of baits is the most effective broad-scale tool that we have for the control of foxes. It is a bit of a contentious one, the use of baits, but it is the thin green line that we have to protect our wildlife and also to help farmers to have sustainable farming systems. There's 2 bait toxins that are available. 1080 is one, and they come in both shelf-stable baits that you can just purchase, or fresh meat baits that you can potentially get from AgVic or other places within Victoria. And so they're 2 options. The other one is PAP. That's a different type of toxin, and that's available as shelf-stable baits. And I'll talk a little bit about those 2 later. But in order to purchase and use pest baits, there's a range of different things that you need to go through to make sure that we're doing it as safely and as effectively as possible. So you need to have an ag chemical users permit for 1080 or PAP, or you need to have a commercial operator's license with a vermin destroyer endorsement, or you need to hold a valid license to use pesticides with an authorization for the control of pest animals. So you need to do training, and you need to have permits and licenses in order to use either of these baits. And again, there's more information on PestSmart and also Agricultural Victoria about baiting and the use of baits. Another delivery method for those 2 toxins is what's called a canid pest ejector. And these can be a really useful alternative device for delivering toxins for a range of different reasons. So again, they come with both 1080 and PAP capsules, and you can see in the middle of that screen is the bait head, and then you can see the lure head, and then you can see a bit of a clear sort of plastic cap. That's the capsule. Again, you must have all the permits, licenses and approvals similar to the use of baits. The good thing about canid pest ejectors, or CPEs, is that the poison is sealed in the capsule. So this means it doesn't break down quickly in the environment like it does in a bait. And so it means that you can leave a CPE in the landscape and it will remain a lethal control for a fox in the landscape for a longer period of time compared to a bait. You drive it into the ground, and so it's secure into the ground. It's essentially a form of tethering the bait, which means that it's not going to be cached by a fox. It's not going to be picked up and taken away and moved. And so you might need to add an extension on if you're in sandy areas, but it is a good way of putting a bait into the landscape and knowing it's going to stay there. This is a targeted method of delivery of toxins because the force, the upward pull force to actually trigger that mechanism is 1.6 kilos. And so that makes it pretty targeted to foxes. Cats can also set them off, so can dogs and dingoes. So it is something to think about if you've got, your domestic or working dogs or anything like that around. It will target both dogs and foxes. It can be repeatedly used. You just need to maintain it well. So it does require maintenance, but you can replace those capsules and also replace the lure head, and you can use a variety of food and scent lures on those bait heads. And so you can mix things up quite easily. As I said, there is a risk to dogs. And so you do need to think about that when you're undertaking any kind of baiting program. There's a range of different, collars that you can put on your CPEs that will restrict the size of the snout going into that CPE. So that could mean that some of those larger dog faces won't actually get access to your CPE, but that narrower nose of a fox will get in. Lure heads will break down, so you do certainly need to replace them, and definitely they need maintenance. But they are something that's really useful to have in the landscape. Again, PestSmart and AgVic have more information about these, and also if you go to ACTA, so Animal Control Technologies Australia, will sell CPEs and bait heads, and you can also make your own bait heads, so that's pretty good for these. Now, 1080 and PAP, so the use of toxins is definitely something that often comes up quite in a lot of discussions. And is it humane or not? What are the risks to 1080 to off-target species? Should or shouldn't we be using it? And I think the thing that I would say is that, again, it is the thin green line that we have for effective control of foxes in order to protect our wildlife, in order to protect lambs, goats, if you're farming goats, and poultry and things like that. And so it is the only tool that we have for broad-scale effective management, and without it, we run the risk of continuing to lose our native wildlife. And so it's really important to think about. We do also obviously need to use it in the best way possible and to reduce those risks. 1080 is sodium fluoroacetate, and fluoroacetate is a toxin that's actually found in a number of our native plant species, particularly the gastrolobium, and most commonly in the southwest of Australia. But what that means is that our native animals have grown up with these plants and evolved a higher level of tolerance to the toxin. And so that has allowed us to use the fluoroacetate in a bait and manufacture it into something that will target introduced species to Australia and have a lower risk to our native wildlife. So again, our native animals have a higher tolerance. Definitely that tolerance is even higher in Western Australia, but we also know that across the eastern states, a lot of our species do have quite a high tolerance to it. So the spotted-tailed quolls can eat more than 3 baits and still be okay. Wedge-tailed eagles more than 10, goannas up to 70, emus is ridiculous, you know, like they're never going to eat enough. It does vary from species to species, and it's important to do a risk assessment of the species that you've got and to have a think about whether they're going to be impacted. But it's also important to think about what's the impact of the predators compared to the potential impact to an individual animal that might eat enough of the bait to be lethal. So it is important to think about these things. As I said, introduced animals have a much lower tolerance. So cats, foxes, pigs, deer, dingoes. So that is one that is likely to come up. Wild dogs, and also some of our livestock. Our introduced livestock have no evolved tolerance, and so they're really susceptible to it. But what that means is that it allows us to use a small amount of the 1080 in a bait to target the species that we're after and reduce the risk to our native wildlife. So there's been a bit of media around baits being dug up and then what's the impact. But again, an animal sniffing at a bait, digging it up, moving it about, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's negatively impacting our native wildlife. So again, a lot of our wildlife has a higher tolerance than foxes, but also we need to look at the population benefits of predation control versus the individual risk to a single species, and that needs to be assessed. 1080 breaks down in the environment, and that will vary how quickly depending on the temperature and the weather and how much rain, but it does break down and it's diluted in water. And so soil microbes and bacteria and fungi will break the baits down. So it's important to remember when you're baiting, you need to replace them, but we don't get the build-up in the environment like you might say with a rodenticide. And that makes it much safer as well in the environment. You don't get a build up the food chain as well because it will break down as those animals digest it, or the animals break down as well. Also, 1080 baits, the 1080 is injected into the center of the bait. So something nibbling around the edge is not necessarily going to get a lethal dose of 1080, but they might do if they eat the whole bait. And so we need to look at how we bait, where we bait, why we bait, and make sure that we're doing it well. Obviously, there is a risk to cats, dogs, and also dingoes. And so you need to look at managing those if there's likely to be risk to those species, and that's not something that you want. So that is something to think about. The alternative to 1080 is PAP. It can be used on foxes and also feral cats as an aside on Crown land, but not cats on private land. Just we won't go into that. With PAP, the positive with PAP is there's an antidote. So if your domestic dog picks up a bait and you know about it and you can get it to a vet quickly enough, there is an antidote to PAP. It also breaks down in soil and water and you don't get the build-up in the environment. But there is still the risk to dogs, cats, dingoes, but also a higher risk to our native wildlife because our native wildlife doesn't have the similar tolerance that it does to 1080. This is particularly an issue to species that are likely to gobble down the whole bait. So goannas, ducks, bandicoots, and those kind of things. And so there is a restriction around the use of PAP. And so you can only, or it's recommended for use if temperatures are going to be less than 16 degrees. So that limits where you might, when and where you might be able to use it. It's also a more costly bait to 1080. But again, we're looking at protection of our wildlife. We're looking at effective control. We're reducing, the overall populations of foxes quickly. It needs to be done properly, and you do still need to look at off-target impacts. But when we're looking at baits, obviously, as I said, the directions of use for Victoria, there's risk assessments, notifications and labels, distance requirements. You need to bury the baits and you should mark where they are so you know where to go and replace baits and things like that. There's a range of requirements around laying, retrieval, disposal times of baits, and that's something that you need to look at in terms of what you need to do under the label and the restrictions in Victoria. It's really important to record outcomes and replace baits in order to get your best outcomes and get an understanding of what's happening. There's a really good resource, which is a field guide to poison baiting of wild dogs and foxes. So if you're baiting for foxes, this will give you some good how and where and when in the landscape. So target known locations. Don't just put baits across the landscape. If you can target where they are, particularly if you're doing ground baiting, then that's going to be most effective. So where do you know that foxes are and how are they using the landscape? They love to move along fire trails and paths. The least resistance to their movement, the better. So they love roads, fire trails, tracks, those kind of things. They'll go to dams and water sources because that's where food's likely to be. They like a tree line, so along a ridge with a tree line, or the interface between trees and farmland. So they'll move along those bits of the landscape, isolated patches of bush, and those corridors in between breeding areas and feeding areas and those kind of things. So if you know where they are, that's where you want to put your baits and your traps and any kind of management that will give you the best bang for your buck. There's also recommended baits per hectare or baits per kilometre to have a look at. So in terms of effective control, the tools haven't really changed, but we're much better at using them. Baiting gives you larger coordinated nil tenure management programs, and that's the most effective. But if you're starting small, because you might be only on your own property and maybe your neighbours don't want to do that yet, that's fair enough. If you can show an improvement in lambing survival or biodiversity or those kind of things, then you're more likely to get more people on board part of your program. And so look at replacement baiting, target seasonal protection. So when are lambs happening? When are your turtles coming in to breed? When's your shorebirds nesting? Those kind of things. You want to start your program 1 or 2 months before that. So you've really reduced fox numbers and therefore impact. And you want to replace baits as they're taken. So a bait replacement strategy is really good because then you're just reducing numbers over that period of time. But you could have ongoing baiting and maybe use your CPEs for this around water points, tracks, uncleared bush, where you know foxes might be moving in to your baited area. So use them like traps. You know, you want to bury them, you want them to be known, you want it in areas where foxes are. More isn't necessarily better, so you just want to be strategic. Make it as easy as possible. Check them as part of your weekly farm or land management program. You know, like it's the easier it is to do, the more likely you're going to do it. As I said, dogs are definitely impacted by baits. And so you really want to look at making sure all of your neighbour notification and signage is up. but also pick up or cover your baits if you're mustering, dismantle your CPEs, those kind of things. Leave your dogs at home when you're laying baits or out and about. It's just you don't need them there. You don't need to increase the risk. And also, if you can get your dogs used to wearing a muzzle, especially for working dogs, they love it. When you get them used to knowing that if a muzzle is put on when they're out working and doing the things they love, then they're quite happy to wear a muzzle. Another common option for management is shooting. It is, as I said, the most humane method because it's quick, especially if you're a trained shooter. And so getting good training and practice is really important. You obviously need a current firearms license and you need to abide by all of the requirements around that. Just as a point of fact, any management that you're doing, if it's not on your own property, you need to make sure that you've got permission to be on there. It's really good for targeting key animals and sort of picking up, I guess, animals that might not have taken baits and those kind of things. The most effective way is either a headshot, is very quick, or shooting into the chest. If you've got a trapped animal, then a shot to the head is a very quick way of euthanizing an animal in a trap. Thermal and IR technology, infrared technology is really improving our ability to see foxes and shoot them. So if you can get your hands on some new tech, then that's excellent. But it's important to remember that shooting alone is not enough for effective fox management. It's an important tool, but if you're looking at 1,200 foxes in a 10-kilometre radius, you won't see all of those foxes and you won't be able to shoot 65% of that population. And so that's where baiting will give you a good knockdown of your population, and then the use of firearms will pick up foxes that might not take those baits, or that maybe your neighbour isn't baiting and you can use shooting as a tool in a coordinated management program. And so it is really important tool, but it needs to be in a coordinated program. So bait first, then shoot. Bounties is another one that often comes up. So bounties have a place, but they're not effective on their own. So it's a similar thing. It's the same as shooting. Like there's a whole suite of reasons why baiting have shown not to be effective as a management tool on their own. And also bounty programs, there's a range of different reasons why they haven't been successful. There's some good information on Pest Smart around that, but that doesn't mean that they're not something that could be used as part of a coordinated management program. Just to give you a little example of thermal, there's a cat sitting there that you don't see just through your naked eye, but you can through a thermal scope. And the cat is not bothered by you, doesn't even know that you're there. And so same with foxes and a range of other species. Thermal is a game changer for some of our shooting programs. Foothold trapping is the other real effective tool, again, as part of an integrated management program. There's a whole suite of requirements around the use of traps, where, how and when you use them. And it's really important, again, that we're doing this in the most humane way possible. Number one, you need to know what you're doing with any animals caught. So you need to make sure that you've got a firearm if you're looking at managing those foxes in traps. Skilled, trained operators, both for setting traps and obviously the use of firearms. So knowing what you're doing will definitely improve effectiveness. You need to check them every 24 hours at least, and also think about if you're trapping in extreme weather conditions. So if it's really hot, really cold, with just thinking about an animal in a trap, you just want to be reducing the risks and the negative impacts to animals in traps. We want to treat them as humanely as we can. There is a new option for putting on traps called PAP putty, but you do need to get approvals for use of that in Victoria. And so it is an option that will give a dose of PAP to the fox that's trapped in the trap, but you do need approvals for use, so it's not available everywhere. Urban areas, the use of leg hold traps or foothold traps is tricky, and you need ministerial approval. Again, there's a whole suite of information on how to set a trap and how best to do them on PestSmart and AgVic. Den fumigation can be really useful, particularly in urban and peri-urban areas where other options are limited. And obviously, if you can reduce the number of cubs that are reaching adulthood, then that's good, and reducing that recruitment. So den fumigation is definitely something that is useful in a program, not effective on its own, but it can be something that is a key tool for some of those urban, peri-urban fox management programs. If you've got a dog that can sniff out a fox, then that certainly makes finding a den a whole lot easier. Denkofume is the only fumigant that is registered for use for foxes. Cage trapping is effective, but not as effective as leg holds, because foxes are just not as likely to go into a cage. The bigger the cage, the better, although there's certainly some cool photos of foxes really tucked up into tiny cages, but obviously they're more likely to go into something bigger. And again, what are you going to do with the animals that you've caught? It's really important to know. So foxes and rabbits, you want to be euthanizing those. Other animals, depending on what they are, you want to be letting them go, depending. If a fox, ideally your trap doesn't have a hook in it, just because a fox or another animal kind of moving about in a trap or hooks cause for injury. You need to check it every 24 hours, ideally cover it and put it in underneath a bush. Again, think about weather conditions, treat the animals humanely. Fencing is an option if you've got the money. And so it's obviously highly effective to put fox-proof fencing up and to remove the cats and foxes from inside. These are used in a number of high wildlife conservation areas. And also some farmers are starting to use fencing for protection of lambing paddocks and things like that. There's some good information around fencing. Again, if you jump on our website, there's some information on where to go to find out good fencing techniques. Management of habitat. So if you're looking after biodiversity, if you've got good quality habitat where animals can go and hide and get away from the predators of cats and foxes, then that can be really useful. So revegetation, weeding, good quality fire management, those kind of things, and effectively managing quality habitat for biodiversity can be really important. Also property hygiene. So if you're out shooting, don't just leave all of your kangaroos in the middle of the paddock, because all you're doing is feeding the foxes. And so it's really important to remove those carcasses of den animals, cover up your rubbish pits and those kind of things. So you really want to look at reducing the food availability for foxes. And that's the same in urban areas. Just reducing food reduces numbers. And also looking at clearing away some of those weedy species that are harbour for animals, or it might be, rubbish where foxes can get in and hide. If you're removing big swathes of gorse or blackberry or those kind of things, do think about the fact that other things are using that as habitat. So just be careful. Rabbit management can certainly help, especially for foxes and especially where rabbits are a key source of food. So we know, as we talked about, where there's lots of rabbits, they're a key part of a fox diet. So undertaking some good rabbit control as well as fox control can be really important. One thing to think about when you're managing rabbits, if you drop their fox food availability by too much you need to think about foxes switching prey. So if you've got native species that might be impacted before the fox numbers get reduced too much, then it can be a good idea to manage rabbits and foxes together. Guardian animals. So guardian animals can be a useful tool. Again, all of this needs to be part of integrated management. They're not enough on their own. And so it is something that can be used and might be used if it's an appropriate thing for your farm or your management program. You want to think about the guardian animal type. What seems to be the case is some of the guardian dogs and also donkeys are pretty effective at keeping dingo wild dogs and foxes at bay. Llamas are, yes, less useful, but some people get success out of llamas, but certainly a lot of people don't. So think about where you are and which guardian animal is best. It needs to be part of an integrated management program. Oh, my list is not coming up in, there we go. You need to think about the training and care. Do you have enough time to get a Marima up to being able to be amongst your stock and protecting those stocks? So you're looking at 2 to 4 years of training from a pup up to a dog that might be useful. And also, you know, you need to feed them, vet care, fencing. You don't want them roaming away. All of these things are costs. So you need to think about what that's going to cost you and whether this is a tool you want to use. And you also need to think of predator numbers. So again, if predator numbers are high, then it's just overwhelming for your guardian animals. And that's where it needs to be part of an integrated management program. So again, you've reduced the number of predators in the landscape, which then allows guardian animals to be more effective. Livestock seems to be more effective with guardian animals. Wildlife, it can vary. It's needing more work to see whether we can use guardian animals on wildlife. And one of the things to think about is whether your guardian animals are having an impact on the things that you're wanting to protect. And also another thing is small areas is better than large for guardian animals. Another thing that comes up, and we're not going to talk about dingo, wild dog issues much tonight. I know that it's certainly something that is been in the news quite a bit in Victoria, and I can imagine there's a few people online that this is of interest to. And so we're not going to talk about dingo/wild dog issues too much, but one thing I did want to raise is that the research isn't out there to show that dingoes are an effective management tool for cats and foxes. It's something that comes up quite a lot, but they don't actually, they might kill a cat or fox, but they don't kill enough of them to have population control or to reduce their impacts. And also they are a predator in the landscape. And so it is increasing predation on some species, which can have negative impacts as well. Obviously, they have been in the landscape for a long time, and I'm certainly not saying that they shouldn't be there, but they're not an effective tool for management, and they do impact on a number of our species like rock wallabies, bilbies, quolls, koalas, those kind of things. The predation and competition of dingoes and foxes together can be really significant. And so we really need to look at where and how we have these animals in the landscape. And it's just important to, I guess, remember that a dingo is going to go after something much easier than a cat or fox that's going to fight back and cause potential injury. And so, you know, just because a fox or a cat might change its behaviour doesn't mean that the impacts have been removed from a landscape. And so that is something that we really need to think about when we're managing foxes. There's some new tech coming on board, which is really helping with management. So trap alert systems are starting to really improve the effectiveness and humaneness of traps, particularly cage traps so far. So Kangaroo Island, Arid Recovery, a whole suite of different places have had really good outcomes with the use of trap alert systems, which basically says if a trap is closed, it will tell you where. And so it means you can get to traps that are closed faster and also reduces the amount of time checking traps. The foothold traps, there's trap alert systems that are being successful for cats, but foxes are slightly different because they're much more likely to chew at any kind of cords that are attached. There is some research about to be undertaken in WA looking at trap alert systems for foothold traps that will be more effective for foxes. So watch this space. Cameras are excellent for monitoring, and they're just a really good tool. And now there's a number of different AI technology to help you sort through all of those photos. So you can get solar panels, you can get 4G cameras that will send photos to your phone or your email, or to systems like Ivorta. And Ivorta helps sort through all of the photos that come in, and then will mark up those photos with all of the different species. And so you might not see things as easily if you're just flicking through a range of photos, but Ivorta has a really good technology of recognizing species and identifying them for you. It does require some training and learning of the system as we go. I'm still finding koalas coming into some of my my cameras in Tasmania, and so it does require some training in some areas. Drones and infrared is definitely something that is really helping as well, both to locate animals, to do monitoring, and also to guide shooters and things into sites. And so again, that thermal, infrared and drone systems are definitely improving things. I will speed through some of this. So timing is critical. Where, are you doing an ongoing management program, or are you targeting particular times of the year? So sustained management over time can be really important for reducing numbers around assets like endangered species, reintroduction sites, lambing paddocks and those kind of things. You might want a more ongoing management program or baiting program. You might look at intermittent management, so critical times of the year. So usually where it's a good time to bait is when foxes are moving about the landscape or starting to breed. And so it might be short-term periods of time when damage is greatest. So turtles are nesting, lambs are lambing, ewes are lambing, those kind of things. So to reduce impacts to levels that are sustainable or acceptable. Winter is pretty good because food availability is lower and targets of off-target species is less. Again, those timings in fox biology, so spring and summer when cubs are born, vixens are hungry, they're in dens, you can manage them at those points in time, or autumn and early winter when young foxes are getting kicked out of home. So at the moment, there's a lot of management going on. Naive young foxes that are hungry are much more likely to take a bait or to go into a trap. After fire, drought or flood, critical, it can be critical times for protecting biodiversity, but again, there's less food, or you might find that these predators are targeting little patches of remaining bush. Again, if there's rabbit control happening, that's a good time to be managing foxes. Right, I'll just quickly go through this slide. We've sort of talked a lot about it. You want to be proactive rather than reactive. Implement management before the impacts. You want it to be targeted. So more is not necessarily better. Use all the tools that you can. Use them effectively, get training, work with your neighbours. Broader scale is better. Shooting on its own is not effective, but shooting is important as a tool. Baiting is still the cheapest and most effective tool. It's excellent for that initial knockdown. Then maybe you can use other tools over time to keep those numbers low. And so baiting is definitely, we know, is the most effective way. You need to manage risks of any of your management programs to off-target species, working dogs, and anything like that. If you can manage multiple species together, then that's ideal. Managing foxes and cats together is great because you're reducing that predation impact, or rabbits as a food source for foxes can be really good. Sometimes you might need to look at managing your feral pigs because pigs like baits too. So sometimes, it might be that you need to manage multiple things. And monitoring is important. This is actually a cat study, but one thing I just wanted to quickly raise was the idea of a predator pit. And so with threatened species in particular, what can happen is the predation by cats and foxes can keep numbers too low, and they just never get enough time to really breed up above the impacts of predation. So if you can knock fox numbers down enough to allow a threatened species to breed up a population, then you may be able to get it above that threshold, and you'll get a positive growth in your wildlife. Tom, if you want to just flick, if you haven't already, these resources into the chat for people. We've got a newsletter and a website. PestSmart's got some excellent information on glove box guides, standard operating procedures, information around 1080, humaneness, a whole lot of really good stuff. The KISS YouTube channel, we ran a range of different cat and fox management forums. There's also how to trap and a whole suite of really useful videos and things on the KISS YouTube channel. AgVic's got some excellent how-to videos and some excellent information around impacts and management of foxes in Victoria. It's really a good one to look at. Feral Scan is a really useful tool. It's a free app that can be used by individuals and groups for monitoring impacts of foxes, numbers and impacts, putting together a plan with your neighbours and using it to really record and map your management programs. And so it is a really useful resource, and it is something that I think would be good to look at if you're looking at control. Weeds Australia, if you're looking at weed management, what weed is what and how to manage it. And Weed Scan is a new tool that's been developed where for a range of different species, you can take a photo, and it's starting to get much better at recognising what that weed is and helping you identify weeds. Right. That's a big chunk of information of which I very quickly run through. And so sorry to dump all of that onto you all, but there's a bit of information around management.
I think you need a glass of water, Jill.
Yeah, it's a very good idea.
You know, a lot of talking, a lot of information. I understand there will be a lot of questions, just cannot be answered in 1.5 hours. I am conscious of the time, so I wonder, because there's a few questions here about how to talk to your neighbors, how to get projects together, how to include state forests, how, you know, or peri and urban groups getting together. You know, I'm not sure if in your case studies you've got something to talk about this that might be useful.
I do. Yep. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, and we might leave the rest of the questions to the end if we have time to answer. But
yeah. And as you said, like any questions that we don't get to, because it is, you know, there is a lot of information, you might not have taken it in, please feel free to look at the resources, get in touch. More than happy to answer that. But there's some really good questions, and I will jump back in and hopefully talk a little bit about it, because obviously coordinated management and engaging with your neighbours and getting everyone on board isn't easy. And so that people management is the hardest part of the program, really. So I will attempt to answer some of those, but again, more than happy to talk to people who are looking at setting up programs, how I might be able to help, how we can, you know, assist with some of that. So please let us know.
And I just wanted to add on funding, because there's been a few questions about funding.
Oh, good. Yep.
Although we can't, there's some funding opportunities that I just want to flag. So, for example, this program that is funding this event tonight is funded through the Victorian government under the Pests and Weeds partnerships. There will potentially be more rounds, so just keep your eyes open for that. And also the VLG, the Victorian Landcare grants program. I've seen a lot of applications coming through for pest control, so that's another opportunity there, and you can apply for 1080, or you can apply for training for 1080. You know, so there's small funding out there available for groups. That's all I wanted to flag.
Brilliant. So in terms of management, it's really good to have a plan. It doesn't have to be a really big detailed plan, but to know what you're doing when and who's doing what and how to know whether it's effective can be really useful. So you can either do something or you can do nothing. And sometimes those two things can be the same. If you're doing something that's not actually reducing the number of foxes enough to be effective, well, then that's sort of the same as doing nothing. And sometimes it can be a bit worse even, because you're getting dispirited and demoralized, and you know, it's really hard to get on board your neighbours if they're not seeing effective management. So really, when we start, it's about doing something useful. It might still be something small, but if you can show positive outcomes, then that can help build your program. And so having a plan can really help with that, not only to work out what you're doing, communicate it with your neighbours, communicate it with state forests or national parks or council or other agencies to get everyone on board. If you can have a good plan with a map and a few pages of what you're doing, then that can be really useful. It's important to know who's the issue. You know, like you might know that your turtles are getting eaten, or your lamb, you're not getting many lambs up to, you know, marking, or the rock wallabies are in decline, or whatever it might be. So having an understanding of who is the issue and what's going on can be important. You know, what are the predators? Is it something else entirely? So having a look at tracks and scats around the place, putting up cameras and getting a sense of what's going on in your landscape can be useful. What are you trying to protect? The why is really important to keep management ongoing, because it needs to be ongoing. Unless you're on an island or you can fence it off into an island, you need ongoing management in order to keep those impacts down. So why is it? Is it a threatened species? Is it a nice patch of bush you love? Are you protecting your livestock? Are you helping your neighbours out? Is it that, you know, foxes are getting into your chickens? What is it? And your why doesn't have to be the same as your neighbours. But having an understanding of what you're all doing and why you're doing it is key, because then that keeps people on board and engages the community as well. Who should be involved? Who, you know, is it your neighbours? Is it Agricultural Victoria? Is it Landcare Victoria? Is it your local Landcare group? Is it your catchment management authority? You know, there's a whole, is it, you know, a local pest controller? There's a whole suite of different people that that you could use both as a resource in terms of information, training and how-to and funding, but also to make sure that your management is coordinated. So having an idea of who and how best to approach them can be useful. Having a bit of a coordinator or a bit of a coordinating group can be useful for broader scale management, to have someone who might be key to getting that program up and running and ongoing, and a contact point or those kind of things can be useful. What tools and technology is out there to help, like feral scan. And so those kind of things can really, you know, reach out to Agricultural Victoria. They're really excellent, and they've got some good operators there that can help with management. And yeah, Landcare is great. All of these different people that can help steer you in the right direction. We're looking at broad scale versus targeted management. I know this is a cat, but it was just such a great little video. I left it in. You know, like, are you targeting your management around your lambing paddocks or around a key threatened species like the turtles, or are you looking at broader scale control? If you can do broad scale control, then that's going to be more effective, even if you're looking at protecting the wetland, like Richard showed us with that video. If you can reduce foxes in the landscape, then that reduces the number of foxes that are going to be reaching those turtles. Defining what the problem, building capacity and equity in your group is really important. Having measurable goals that you can really work out whether it's working is all quite important. So again, it doesn't have to be really big and complicated and detailed, but having an understanding of this is important. And devising a plan with integrated tools. So making sure that you've got all your permits and training for baits, that you can get access to baits when you need them, that you've got someone with a firearms license who can come in and do some shooting on your property if you're not able to do it yourself. Who might you get to help with trapping, again, if you're not doing it yourself? Having a plan is really important. Then do it and monitor it. So have a look, is it working? Like, how are you going to know whether what you're doing is working? It's no use saying, I killed 100 foxes this year, because what does that mean? Like, did you get more lambs reaching marking time? Did you get more turtles actually, you know, reaching adulthood and breeding themselves? Like, if you don't monitor it, you don't know whether it's effective, and you don't know how to change. And also, you can't show that it's working to get more funding or to get your neighbours on board. So to have information can really help. If you can go to your neighbour, I did these things and I've now got more lambs in my paddock, then your neighbour's likely to get on board. Evaluate that data, change if necessary. If you don't need to change, keep going. But you might need to modify. It might be that you didn't have the right species. You need to redefine the problem. You might need to increase the number of landholders being involved. And that might be, showing, you know, talking to neighbours about why foxes need to be managed, how to manage them, how to get them involved. And then eventually it might be looking at having a broad scale program that's happening, and, you know, can we look at enforcement in the last couple of properties? These kind of things are important. You might need to revise your goals. You might have set them too high or too low, or you might not be undertaking management at the right time. So it's important to look at those kind of things. Again, look at where you're putting your traps or your baits through the landscape, or where you might be shooting, when you might be shooting, and those kind of things. Getting a map is an excellent way to start talking to your neighbours and getting people on board. It's amazing how having a big map in a meeting can draw people in, because people like to show where they are, where their assets are, what are they wanting to protect, where do they know impacts are highest, you know, what they're doing in the landscape, what their neighbours are doing. And so it's really important to, find all of that information out and have a map as part of your plan, because that can be really useful. And it's not your neighbour's foxes, it's everyone's foxes. So, you know, you've got foxes too, likely, not just your neighbours. And so it's important for you to manage foxes on your own land as well as with your neighbours. And put together a plan. Again, doesn't have to be big. What are the actions? Who's doing it? When are they doing it? How are you going to monitor it? If you're having a meeting and you don't have a map, it's just not going to go as well. It's just something that just seems to really work to get those people that might not be happy to speak up in a meeting are happy to stand around a map and point some things out. It can be really useful. Monitoring is key. How many foxes have you got? How many do you need to get rid of? What's the activity and movement across the landscape? You know, tracks can be really useful. So either using naturally sandy areas or setting up a sandy patch and then smoothing it all out and having a look at footprints that go across. So getting a sense of that can be really useful. Spotlight counts can be useful, but that's a bit harder in forested areas. But you can do before and after management spotlight counts. Did you get a good knockdown? Make sure if you any of these monitoring, you want same area, same method, same time. So you're not getting different accounts because you did one in summer and one in winter, or you did a spotlighting count and then you did a track count. It's really hard to be able to compare results if you're not doing that. Remote cameras are really useful tools. There's obviously a cost to those, but if you're looking at grants, getting remote cameras can be a really useful tool for monitoring both foxes and also your native wildlife. You can also put cameras on your baits, so you can record what bait was taken, who took it, you know, and was it a fox or not? Just because a bait's been taken doesn't mean that it was a fox. PestSmart, again, Tom, if you haven't already, there's a monitoring techniques for vertebrate pests, foxes in PestSmart. It is quite a big document, but it does have some excellent and useful information. We're trying to pull together a bit of an easier monitoring document, but we're a little way off, but that will give you some good information. Fox scan is, again, a useful thing. So you want to monitor the reduction of impacts as well as the foxes. A little example of a program in Victoria that I sort of talked about right at the start was Less Predators, More Lambs in Mansfield. And this was done by a farmer group there, and they were looking at predation. So they were actually looking at wild dog and fox predation on their lambs and how to manage that. So they worked with Meat and Livestock Association, the Wild Dog Action Plan, Australian Wool Industry, and they put together a demonstration site that ran for 3 years, and they really got some good engagement. Not everyone wanted to be involved in that program, but they wanted to look at improving lamb survival through effective management of predators. One of the first things that they did, obviously, was have a few meetings. They talked to who were the key movers and shakers in that area, who were producers trusting, was there a group already established that they could work with, and how could they work with those farmers. Again, not everyone wanted to be involved, and not everyone thought that foxes were having an impact. There's kind of thoughts that actually foxes just eat carrion, they're just cleaning stuff up, they're not impacting on lambs. And so what they did was they did a random selection of 44 lambs in a whole suite of paddocks across the area, and they autopsied them. And what they found was that 18% of those lambs were killed by predation. And that was much higher than anyone expected, or any of the producers. They just didn't think that there was that higher rate of lamb loss. And so that automatically got some people on board because they could show what the impact was. They implemented a 6-week bait replacement program, and they were 8 non-neighbouring properties. So it wasn't even coordinated with neighbours, this one. They were non-neighbouring, but they were all doing it together, and they could, you know, get in touch with each other and help each other out. And what they found was that lamb survival increased by 2 to 5% on those properties. And so for them, that was an extra $42,000 of income. So that's looking at 280 lambs at 150 head over the participating farms. Obviously that varies depending on, you know, the cost of lambs, but a 2 to 5% survival rate, $42,000 increase in income. The cost to them was a $200 a bucket, you know, of 250 baits. So that's a really big increase. So not all were adjoining properties, but they worked collectively, they talked together, they shared knowledge, and they shared outcomes, and they shared support. And now, because of that outcome, they're now employing someone to do the baiting. And so they went, oh, well, this is a really good outcome, but we don't have the time to do this ourselves. But it's worth us all joining together. So 3 of the properties are now employing a person who goes out and baits for them. And so this was, obviously they're all sheep producers. So the impacts were there, but they weren't all neighbouring. So, you know, there was some cropping farms in between, but they still got some good outcomes, and they've carried on this program. And neighbours are interested. Shoalhaven, I'll just quickly run through Shoalhaven. In New South Wales, quite a big area. There's a coordinated fox control program there done by Shoalhaven Landcare and partners. So again, partnerships are really important. So same with the Mansfield one, just having a partnership with MLA and AgVic and the Wild Dog Coordinating Program. Here it's the same. The local land services, so the catchment management authorities there, a Landcare, they've got a coordinator who works he gets paid 1 day a week, but he works more than that. And they've managed to build an effective fox control program in the Shoalhaven area and they're doing it primarily for biodiversity conservation. And so they've really built up the number of landholders that are effectively managing foxes on their land, that are getting really good training, getting support with baits. They're managing around national parks that have shorebirds, rock wallabies, spotted-tailed quolls, and they're really improving management for biodiversity, but also having good outcomes for farmers as well. Again, they have a whole range of training and information days, which gets community support for the program, builds more people who are coming on board and making sure that the management that they're doing is good. They've got a newsletter and a Facebook page and a whole lot of things that let people know what's doing. And they run training programs and have some coordinated managers and pest controllers that go out to do work. And so, sorry, that is something that is building and has improved over time as they've improved their plan and their monitoring, and they've continued to get funding and support in the community. Really quickly, because I know we're getting to the end of time, urban fox management and peri-urban fox management is hard. Like it is hard because your tools are limited. Primarily because access to baits are really limited. There's a number of different fox control programs that are reducing impacts of foxes fairly successfully. And again, Tom, if you can find it, the Urban Fox forum that we ran has a few of these, and this one in the Queensland Coastal Reserves is one of them. A number of the coastal councils have got together, and a key thing that they're actually doing is they're employing Steve Austin and his dogs, and they're going along those coastal reserves where there's impacts of foxes on shorebirds, and the dogs are finding dens, and then they're fumigating those den sites. They do have some shooting and trapping programs involved as well, and I think they might be bringing in some baiting, but baiting is difficult in these landscapes. But what they're finding is that they've managed to they've done some monitoring of the foxes there, and numbers have been significantly reduced, as have impacts. They're a bit lucky in that area because there seems to be a bit of an isolated population for some reason. They did some genetics of foxes there, and they've actually found that there doesn't seem to be too many foxes coming in. And so they're able to almost have a bit of an island of foxes. But what Steve and a couple of other handlers do is they find the den sites, they fumigate the den sites, but they don't destroy them. It could be useful to destroy the dens, but sometimes it can be useful to leave them there because then you can monitor them, because you know that's a good site for a vixen to come and have her pups. And so if you leave it there, you can see when it becomes active again. And so they've been quite successful. But there is a number of different fox programs in urban areas, including trapping, shooting in some spots, and den fumigation that can be good. There is a good glove box guide that has recently been put together for wild dog management in peri-urban areas, which is also useful for foxes because how we manage wild dogs is similar to foxes. So it can be quite a useful resource as well in the glove box guide section of Pest Smart. I'm going to leave it there. Again, sorry for the very dense and speedy talk, but just to give a bit of an overview, and yeah, please be in touch if we can help.
Thanks, Jill. There was definitely a lot we covered. Apologies for going a little bit over time, but I do think these case studies were really relevant to all. And thanks for sharing, Jill. Thanks so much, Thomas, for getting those questions answered in the Q&A. Apologies if we didn't get to your questions. There were and thanks for all the comments that you put in the chat. I'm sure some of them are very valuable. Yes.
Also, Tom, which you might have done, we've in our newsletter, we have project snapshots on a range of different projects as well, and they're now up on our website as well. So people can have a bit of a look at those, and we're building the case studies and project snapshots as well to help.
And Angela, are we able to share the presentation with everyone or not?
Yeah, as in
Yes.
the one that I've done, or
Yes.
the recorded version?
The one that you've
Yeah,
just
look,
done.
I will attempt to put it in a share, because at the moment it's about 300,000, like it's massive because the photos are big, but
Yeah.
I will
PDF.
attempt to do a PDF shareable version for you that you
All
can.
right. Then we can
Yeah.
share with you, and you've got, and I might be able to share some of those links as well as a follow-up. I won't leave you here for much longer. I just want you to have a great night, and I really thank Jill, Richard, and Tom, and Sarah for being here, also helping with questions. And yes, and thanks to the Victorian government for funding us. But I know that you're all keen to go, so I'm just going to let you go.